All right, welcome back to the weekly Solar Surge live training. Hey folks, we are here every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, streaming out live to YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. And of course, our goal here is to deliver maximum value in the area of solar sales. At this point, I'd like to bring on my co-host, Dan Freshley, CEO at Radiant Solar, and of course, my partner here at Solar Surge and Solar Surge University. Dan, I'm really looking forward to give this training with you on the solar installation process. Welcome back to the broadcast.
Yeah, likewise. Glad to be here, and thanks for to those that are tuning in. I don't know, Joe, drawing a blank if you just mentioned this or not, but guys, throughout the broadcast today, if you have questions about anything pertaining to not just the installation process, but solar in general, recommendations for topics of things you'd like for us to cover, drop them in the chat here. We'll be constantly monitoring. We've got a dashboard on our side where they show up right in front of us. So we want to make sure we can get to all your guys' questions and just provide maximum value, as Joe said. So looking forward to getting into this topic today, though, about the installation process.
Absolutely. You know, I know so much of what we put out recently on the channel is about, solar equipment and solar sales. But in today's video, we're going to be diving into, okay, what actually happens after the sale and what are all the steps necessary to execute a successful solar installation. Because as we've said in previous trainings, when you're selling solar, you're not just selling an off-the-shelf product. You're not just selling solar panels. You're not just selling, let's say, batteries. What you're actually selling is a construction project. And just like any other residential construction, for a solar installation, you pretty much have to go through the same process, which involves getting engineering plans drawn up. It involves submitting for permit applications, paying permit fees. In the case of solar, there's paperwork you have to do with the power company as well. So you kind of have to apply to your local jurisdiction, what we call AHJ here in the industry, which stands for Authority Having Jurisdiction. That's typically like your city or your county government, where you go to your local permit office. But you also have to apply to the power company to make sure that they're okay with the equipment that you're going to be installing. In some cases, we have to deal with homeowners associations, depending on what neighborhood you live in. And so there's this whole process that we have to go through to get all the necessary approvals before the actual team will show up to physically install the solar panels on your roof. And then, of course, after the equipment's installed, there's also inspections and additional filings with the power company that have to be completed before your system actually achieves this coveted PTO, right? That's what we all want, this PTO, which stands for Final Permission to Operate. So we're going to be walking through each of the major milestones in the process so that you all have a good understanding of the process and also, importantly, so that you can set accurate expectations with your homeowner at the time of sale of exactly what they can expect and the various things that have to happen before the physical panels are installed. Dan, I guess I would just pose a question to you. Why do you think it's important for solar sales professionals to have a solid grasp of the construction process itself?
Yeah, a good question. I think the main thing really has to do with just being able to properly articulate to your homeowner a reasonable expectation as to what's going to be happening during the project. I think I've heard people say before, where expectations are not met, trust is broken. So the reality of it is like, look, if you're not conveying a proper expectation of what's going to happen, you're going to break trust. It's going to lead to a bad experience. And a lot of times I see that, I think, frankly, probably those that are more, more rookies in the industry or just like haven't been around it. Maybe it's their first time working in a construction type field where you sort of make promises with no ill intent, but you make promises that, hey, this is how smooth this is going to go. This is what's going to happen. We're going to have this thing up and running in 2 weeks. And then before you know it, it takes 2 weeks just to get a permit filed properly or to be reviewed, or, you run into a problem during the construction. There's tons of things that can happen. I mean, I've got a laundry list of things a mile long of you wouldn't think this could happen, and then it does. But I think that's a big thing is like, if you can set expectation properly, you're not going to be viewed as the salesperson just sold me this and it didn't work that way, right? I think we all know, Joe, you had a video a while back that was a little bit of a viral one in a way of like why you stopped selling solar. And the whole conversation, though, was not about that you actually stopped selling, but you stopped acting like and being like some of those classic salespeople, and you provided value and education and et cetera. Well, I think a lot of times like that is the thing with salespeople, right? Like most industries have a similar look. Yep, the salesperson, oversold this, or the salesperson did XYZ. And then here there is the person on the back end that has to kind of clean up that mess. Now I'm all about sales, right? I love sales. And I would argue, hey, look, if it wasn't for the salesperson, the other person didn't have a job. Right. And so like that's where sales really is powerful. But like at the same time, if you're a professional in sales, you'll sell with proper expectation, and it will be a super smooth process from sale all the way through the fulfillment. And in this case, it's construction. So I think it's just important that we grasp that whole process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, as sales representatives, we are acting as representatives of the installation company. And so, as representatives of that company, we should know how that company operates and the processes and procedures that they have to execute, even though that may not be your purview, work that you have to do. You should know how that work is being done. And again, that's just going to set you apart from the competition, people that just know how to sell solar panels, as opposed to people that can actually educate the homeowner on what the entire process looks like to get a successful solar installation. So on that note, I actually like to share a slide with you all that I actually used to use when I was selling solar in the home. During sort of the next steps part of the sales presentation, I would kind of walk the homeowners through what they could expect during this process. So we're gonna reference back to this chart a few times throughout the broadcast here, but on the first half of this slide, everything that's to the left of deliver materials to job site. So this is basically all of your pre-approvals that are needed. And there's three main pre-approval areas that we're going to be focusing on. The first one, which is on the top line there, is engineering and permitting. The second one along the middle line there is your utility interconnection application. And then the bottom line there is optionally, if you have a homeowners association or a property owners association, there are some approvals that need to be secured there as well. So let's talk any construction project needs, which is engineering and permitting. And so, as I said early, installing solar on a home is just like making any other permanent modification to the home. Whether maybe you're building an addition on the home, maybe you're putting in a swimming pool or something like that. It's the same process that we have to follow with the local AHJ with a solar installation. And so that means that whatever system design that you have at the time of sale, perhaps you're using the design software like we use here. We use the Aurora Solar design software. I know there's Solo, there's Solar Graph, Pipe, there's a number of good ones out there. But typically that design is not going to have enough detail to actually go to the local AHJ and apply for the permit. They're going to want to see plans that have detail, in many cases, detail down to the individual. Where is each screw going into the roof? Like, where is each circuit breaker going to be connected? Like, they want it specific and detailed, because what the county is going to do, or what the local AHJ is going to do, is they're going to review your plans, and then they're going to do a code compliance check. They're going to say hey, is the manner in which they want to install this solar system, is that compliant with local building codes, electrical codes, of course, the national codes as well. Some localities may require you to build to a higher standard. For example, we do a lot of projects in coastal Florida right now where the hurricane threat there causes the local building code to basically have a higher wind rating standard. And so again, they're going to be looking at these fully detailed engineered plans, and then their internal plan reviewers and engineers are going to be doing calculations and things to make sure that the manner in which we're proposing to install the solar system is fully code compliant in all the relevant areas. Dan, anything to add on that? Any feedback?
Yeah, I think the main thing when I'm helping to summarize a little bit of this to the homeowners, I'm always kind of wanting to come from the perspective of, how do you break down a complex topic and try to do it in a manner that a homeowner can, easily understand. Now, look, you might be working with some clients that are engineers, right? And they understand these things. But for most people, I say, hey, look, during this process, there's a couple different engineering requirements that are going to take place. And I like to try to give them an idea as to what that timeline might look like. What I have found in most of the places that, we operate in, and what I think is a pretty generally safe time window to tell somebody, is that the engineering and permitting process typically can take anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks. That's what I have typically seen in a lot of the markets that I've done business in. And that gives a lot of time. And one thing that I have to make sure that homeowners understand too, when I'm explaining and selling the installation process, It's that, look, depending on who the company is, if they're one of our partners and they're well established, a lot of these companies have the bandwidth to be able to turn around a project because they've got great operational efficiencies. They can turn around a project in a matter of, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, if it weren't for having to get approvals and going through all of this, right? If it was just as simple as going from a site survey directly to, hey, let's go ahead and build the thing, they could probably do it in just a couple of weeks. But I'll tell a homeowner the real, lion's share of the length of time that it takes to get this done is right here in engineering and permitting, because it's something that is outside of the control of the contractor. They can control how quickly they, prepare the plans. They can control how quickly they submit everything. Ideally, that's done, pretty much right away within a week to a week and a half, 2 weeks from when the contract is signed. But they can't control how quickly the local jurisdictions or the AHJ approves those plans. So I just explain that to the homeowner and say, look, we can control how quickly we get things submitted. Our average install timeline is X, depending on the market. A lot of our partners are right around 60-day average install timelines. But a vast majority of those 60 days is waiting on the counties, waiting on the authorities to approve things, where again, the installer could probably have the project up and running in a 2-week period if it wasn't for that requirement. So I explain that to the homeowner so that they understand that as well.
Yep. And that actually ties in with a question that just came in here from Connor Quinn. He's asking, can you go over the process of the discovery call along with what needs to be covered during the site survey and home visit? So Connor, thank you for the engagement. Thank you for that question there. We actually do have another training where we focus specifically on how to do the discovery process, which is, we say this is really the first step in the professional sales process, is doing needs analysis, doing the discovery call. And by the way, folks, if you haven't already got it, make sure you grab the free download, which is the Solar Surge 3-step virtual sales process. It talks about how to conduct the discovery interview, how to actually deliver the sales presentation, and then how to follow up and close the sale. So there should be a link down below here in the broadcast if you want to get that free download if you haven't gotten it already. But I think that the gist of what a lot of the viewers here today want to know is, do you present this entire installation process during your standard discovery or your standard sales presentation? Personally, I do not, unless the homeowner asks about it. Typically, once I've delivered my sales presentation, and again, for those of you in Solar Surge University, or for those that want the basic outline, you can get the free download. But once I've delivered my sales presentation, I'm typically calling to action to the next step, right? And so that next step is generally going to be, we need to get a work order signed, or we need to get you, get your credit approval, or get a credit pre-approval, something to that sort. So I try not to complicate it with trying to educate them on too many steps at one time, because again, the confused mind always says no. So the last thing I want to do at the time where I'm asking for the sale is to throw in a bunch of new concepts and potentially confuse my prospect. So it's really just going to be a succinct call to action to the next step, either get the paperwork going or get the credit approval going. However, I want to be prepared with this material if the homeowner has questions about the process, because again, as professional solar salespeople, we want to be in the position of the trusted advisor, the trusted educator. And that philosophy pretty much underlies everything we do here at Solar Surge. Is we want to provide as much value upfront through education, so that when your prospect or when a potential business partner is ready to do business, they're going to look to you as somebody that they want to do business with. So, Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. One of the things that I use, and I just kind of developed over the years as well, that kind of goes into that closing process. Again, you don't want to overwhelm the homeowner with all these things that are to come, and that confuses them. But I do a lot of times, and if you were a dealer partner of ours here at Solar Surge, we have our Aurora proposal tool that we use, and on the final presentation slide of that proposal explains kind of like the next steps. And that next steps shows 7 items that happen. And the way that I have used that slide is I use that as a closing slide to say, hey, step number 1 is we're going to review the agreements and get your project started here, right? But what it shows in that process is step 2 becomes site surveys, step 3, engineering and permitting, all the way through ultimately where there's system activation, energy independence, PTO. And so I'm not necessarily going to go through every single one of those and give them way too much information. I'm not going to show them this diagram that we were just referencing here, but it is a good way to kind of give them an idea of telling them, hey, this is where you go from here, right? Most people, I think in professional sales, if you show somebody a product or a service or something that can help them accomplish the outcome they had in mind, a lot of times the next natural step is, okay, where do I go from here? What do I do next? What's my next step? Where do I go? And so I show them that timeline to help them understand as well that, hey, there's a set of things that have to occur here. But the first one that you and I can personally control right now today is that we review the agreements. We get you signed up, we get your financing approvals, what have you, and then we'll move on to the next steps from there. So, hey, any objections to that? You want to go ahead and get started, right? And then that's kind of what we would jump into. So that's a lot of what I like to do is I use that sort of guideline to show, hey, these are the steps we have to go through, but none of this matters if we don't start with step number one, which is getting you signed up, getting you approved, getting a contract in place. Can we go ahead and get started? So that's what I like to do, Joe, as we kind of lead into that. And then beyond that, I might help share, some updates as we progress as to, hey, here's what to expect. Here's what's coming next. Typically I do that after documents have been signed. I might then say, hey, next step from here is going to be a site survey and kind of help prep them for what is to come. But I don't necessarily need to get way into that before the documents have even been signed, right? That's like essentially it's wasted time. It's confusing. And you're assuming that, we're getting married before we even went on our first date, right? It's like, let's start with the date and then let's progress. We don't need to talk about, the marriage bells before we've even had the first date. So.
Right. And that sort of summary bullet list that you referenced from the Aurora proposal, I think that's about as detailed as you want to get with them, because the implication is, like you said, look, this is what we have to go through, but the first step, like the next thing we need to do to move this forward, is to get the documents signed so that we can schedule your site survey. Right. And that becomes sort of the enticement, just like, let's get the paperwork out of the way. Again, you don't want to put more importance on signing the contract than there really needs to be. If the homeowner is bought into the solution that you've proposed, then doing the paperwork is just a necessary step to get there, just like the site survey is the next necessary step to get there. And I actually should put that back on the screen, because I glossed over the site survey on my initial outline here. But the site survey really is what kicks all of this off. And it's so important that we do that too, because again, even using some of the best design softwares out there, we can't do everything 100% accurate just from the computer, right? And so eventually somebody has to get there physically on site and verify that everything that you've proposed to do, whether it's terms of solar panels on the roof, whether it's hooking up batteries or putting in a transfer switch at the main panel, somebody's got to actually get there on site, do a roof inspection, do an electrical panel inspection, verify all the measurements. It's actually a pretty exhaustive report. Some of the site survey reports I've seen have over 100 photographs that the surveyor will collect. But the idea here is to make sure that what was sold, what was designed and sold at the point of sale, actually can be installed as intended. Because if we have to make any changes on the contract, better to do that right out of the gate, as opposed to getting further down the costly engineering and permitting process just to have to go back and say, oh, we actually can't fit all those panels. We have to remove some panels, or we have to take a couple panels from this side of the roof, move them to that side. The earlier in the process that you can make those adjustments, the better it is for everybody. The less wasted money for the contractor and just less frustration from the homeowner. Again, we want to kind of keep everybody's interests and expectations aligned.
Exactly. Yeah, and I appreciate a couple of these comments here that were asking about that original discovery conversation we had. I just dropped the link to that initial live in the chat here as well. So go ahead and go back, watch through that. That's a little bit more of the full. I think that entire video was titled the full like solar installation or full sales process. But a lot of that video, we talk about the discovery call. We talk about needs analysis. We talk about the early stages that lead into the sale process. So check that one out for those that might have been asking about that in the comments. And again, appreciate your comments and stuff here. Connor Quinn had left a comment here as well that I think is a good one. Do you recommend leaving some sort of brochure or flyer in the house after the pitch? It really kind of depends. I would say that if you're doing things in person, I mean, I know Joe back in the day, like our standard process way back was we printed out our proposal, our documents, everything there. Now, it makes it seem like it was like 1980s or something, but we still did things electronically. But back then, I mean, you know, we would have a lot of wet signatures. People would sign paper, and that was just kind of the process. Now, again, I think at that time, again, it makes it feel like it was so long ago, but in the pre-COVID world of electronics and where people are just used to doing things digitally now, that was kind of common. It's like, let me bring my there, and there was even closing techniques behind how you hand someone a pen, right? And like, so we used to learn these things. It's not as relevant today, but there is a technique on how you, if you're in the home and you're doing everything digitally, how you turn your iPad or how you turn your computer, how you set up the ability for someone to sign a document like that. There is psychology that goes into that stuff. But Connor, to answer your question directly, I'm always leaving them something. Now, most of what we do here, 99% plus of what we do here at Solar Surge is done virtually. So that is us either maybe sending them something via email, could be a PDF, could be the proposal, could be a dynamic proposal link. Like for example, with Aurora, our proposals have the ability to be sent via a web link where someone can then click on it and then interact with that proposal. And that there's a lot of proposal softwares and tools out there today that do something similarly. So it gives them a very dynamic way of doing it. You can also save it as a good old fashioned PDF for those that like to just print it off and want something in paper to look at. So there's that. If I were doing things in home though, I typically do like to bring some sort of like a company asset, so to speak, right? Like a brochure or just something that helps them feel like they're taking something tangibly away from that conversation. I do think that's wise, is to have something there. Could be your proposal itself that you've already printed out ahead of time. It could just be a marketing flyer that you've created about who your company is and who you are and what your processes are, and a way obviously for them to contact you, things like that. But I'd recommend leaving something, so that would make sense.
Makes sense. Yeah, no, I can remember back in the in-home sales days, I would generally have one-page printouts of, my proposal, maybe the solar panel data sheet, maybe the micro inverter data sheet. If I was selling an N-phase system, I know I was doing a lot of that. And I would have it all in a folder with the customer's name on it, and that would be my leave behind. So they had sort of all the key information. But as Dan referenced, in the post-COVID era now, where we're delivering proposals virtually, it's pretty much a video link that I'm leaving behind. I'm leaving them a video of me presenting the solution to them, and then they can watch that video on their own time. And it's actually a great indicator for me, because I can look at who's interacting with the proposal, who's actually watching my proposal, because that then cues me of who I'm going to be following up with first. So I'm trying to catch the hot leads, the ones that are actually actively engaged and looking at what I'm sending first, and then I can get to the others later.
Yeah, I think that's a super powerful tool of how we use Loom. For those that don't know, we've talked about this, but that's Loom, Loom, not Zoom. But Loom is a way for us to do a video presentation, right? So we'll do a video presentation, sharing our screen. There'll be a little circle, video of us down in the corner, essentially narrating what we're showing, but there's engagements on that. So that's the thing, that's a big part that Joe's mentioning here, is that we know how many views are being seen. Now, there's also other proposal tools out there where you can have alerts based on how many times they open the link, which serves a similar type of purpose. Find what works best for you, but we've just found that the Loom methodology works really well for us here. It allows us to present a solution, not have to sort of like hassle or haggle with the customer that wants information. Because sometimes the customer's like, hey, can you get me a proposal? They don't want the whole like, oh yeah, well, let me set up a call and then let's jump on a Zoom meeting. And they're like, no, I just want a proposal. Like, I've already talked to 4 other people. I want a proposal. What's your best offer? So proper sales is like, okay, learn how to handle that and not just blindly send them a proposal, right? Handle that, because that is a bit of an objection. But what we found works well is, okay, great. Yeah, I'll get you a proposal. But rather than me just sending you a PDF proposal, I'm going to send you a Loom presentation that's 10 minutes long of me showing you the proposal. That way, they're not just gravitating right towards the bottom number. What's the price? It's like you show them on your time what you want them to see. So we've just found that to work pretty well for us here. Not to mention some of the data points we get to see, after the fact, like you just mentioned, Joe.
Yep. Hey, Dan, I see we've actually got some great questions coming in here. I'll put another one up on the screen here for everybody. So Jason Andrade asks, as the sales portion of the installation, or as the sales portion of the install, how do you guarantee the installation and warranty of the installation? So Jason, this is a great question, and appreciate the engagement here. Typically, it's going to be based on who the who the installer is that you're representing and what their warranty terms are. So, you know, you're generally, as a sales organization, you're generally not going to be making any kind of warranties or guarantees. Typically, it's going to be the installer that you're representing will have as part of their standard contract agreement. Now, what we're seeing industry wide, what we're seeing is becoming pretty much standard, is a 25-year bumper to bumper warranty on the solar and the inverters, and then typically somewhere in a 10 or 12-year range for a roof leak warranty. And so if the installer that you're working with is not offering something that sounds close to that, it might be something that you want to take a look at. Are there any better options there? Because I think what I'm seeing from the homeowner side is they're all pretty much expecting a 25-year guarantee. And of course, many of these solar projects are being financed with 25-year loans or 25-year lease agreements. And so again, those finance companies want to know the installer is going to be standing behind the work for the entire term as well. Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of what we do, here at Solar Surge is we're really selling on the value that we have with the installation partner we work with. So we're talking about the warranties that they offer, how that differentiates them, how we vetted who the partners are that we work with, etc. Um, so it's not as much something that I have to get into much, directly, but it's included in the contract. It's included in sort of the overall value proposition of who it is that we're recommending and who it is, that we're proposing for this project, and why, they should trust our recommendation, why they should trust that company. So we do a lot of that. Another question that came in here from Whaling City Solar. Good to have you back here. I remember recognizing this before. So you mentioned we found it difficult to compare paying a veteran guy to hand measure while tied off, which is expensive, versus buying an Eagle View versus Nearmap versus a drone software. Thoughts from actual experience. So, I know a lot of the partners that we work with today still pay the veteran guy to go do things on site. But I know that as part of my own business and, doing roofing work and other things along those lines, Eagle View and other satellite imagery softwares are really, really accurate. And Eagle View is pretty much industry standard for most of the roofing industry to get super accurate roof measurements. So that is a great tool to use. And frankly, it's probably, the costs are going to be significantly less to order Eagle View reports on every project than it would be to send out your veteran person that might take them an hour, 2 hours, or whatever it is to tie off, measure the roof, etc. That's why, most roofing contractors have pivoted essentially to only using Eagle View versus doing hand measurements like it used to be back in the day. There's also other tools out there as well, though. For example, depending on how a company is set up, you could use Aurora. And Aurora's got an entire engineering plan set department that relies on, the dimensions that they pull from Aurora combined with other tools to generate plan sets. So that's an option if you don't already have someone that's handling plan sets, what you probably do, but could be another option for some cost savings measure. Obviously, there's going to be a price that goes along with that to Aurora, but the comparison then just becomes, okay, am I spending more money paying my person to go do this or paying Aurora? So that could be a good reference there as well. But what I just know from most of our installers today is most of them are still doing sort of the old school method of sending someone out there to measure. But Eagle View would be another great option, or, Aurora Designs or Aurora Plan Sets could be another, possible option.
Yeah, in my experience, the Aurora software, especially when paired with the Nearmaps imagery, because that's what I'm typically using is Aurora design software, but getting the up-to-date high-res 3D Nearmaps imagery, we don't tend to have a lot of problems in terms of roof measurement and roof layout anymore. But where we can run into problems is issues with the home's electrical system, right? And so we've had a number of projects where we started the project, but then once we get into it, the site surveyor uncovers that there's issues with the home electrical system. Maybe an electrical panel upgrade is required, or maybe we have to route a conduit in a manner such that it requires trenching through concrete, or things of this sort, or there could just be, you know, out of code electrical work that was done on the property. And since we're going to be touching that work in the course of the solar installation, in many cases, we're required to correct those code violations and kind of bring everything that we touch up to code, up to the current standards. So again, it doesn't always come down to roof measurements or things of that sort. It could be something unique to that home's electrical system that causes us to kind of have to make some adjustments or pivot or shift course. And so I think that's why most of our larger installers where we're doing significant volume, they still do the on-site manual survey, because in the big picture, it just kind of saves everybody more cost. You know, frankly, it saves us more cost having to go back and do rework. And also, I think helps provide a more consistent customer experience for the homeowner.
Yeah, that's a great point. I frankly, because we were the question was more targeted towards the measurement side, I hadn't even thought about that, but that really actually is the most imperative part as to why the traditional on-site survey method still pretty much has to exist. I mean, it's possible if you had a homeowner that was savvy enough that they could take enough pictures, or, you know, a sales rep that goes out in person could gather pictures if you train them properly. I know some companies will do that, but the electrical side is the part that more times than not, I think what we've observed is that's really why the site survey has to exist, is not because of the roof measurements. It's more because of, you know, the current panel conditions, the location. Is there a battery? Isn't there? Where would you put the equipment? Right? There's a lot that goes into it. So I think most installers, when they're out there, just figure, hey, we might as well get everything accurately while we're here. So
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. All right. One more question, guys, and then we'll go back into the main topic for the presentation. But George Green here is asking, how do you break down the numbers from the electric bill for the homeowner? So George, great question. I'm not going to get into that too much right now because that's not the topic for today's training, but we do have a great training on that. Especially if you're part of Solar Surge University, we go into really in depth on how to analyze different types of electric bills and how to present that to your homeowner. But the best place to start would be one of our earlier live trainings that we did, which was entitled, I believe, How to Sell Solar, or How to Sell Solar the Right Way, where we actually go through and teach this 3-step virtual sales process in detail. So, Dan, I don't know if that was one of the links that you had shared in the comments section earlier, but George, I think that would be the best place to start. And then just go through, if you have time, go through each of the weekly live trainings, because each one of them is related to how to be successful in solar sales. And of course, a big part of that is needs analysis, right? Understanding what your prospect's current situation is, asking the right questions so you can get the right information out to figure out what their pain points are, what their goals are, what are they looking to accomplish potentially with the solar project, so that you can then deliver a design and a proposal that's going to best meet those needs.
yeah, I think that was covered a little bit in that video. I'll drop another link to an additional video that I know we touched on as well, which is the Designing a Solar System full live training. This is one where we actually get into things about Aurora as well. But I think both of those hand in hand really break down a lot of that. So I'll go ahead and drop that in here right now as an additional video. But again, everything on our YouTube channel too, if you go back to just the main channel, go to the live tab, you can see all of the previous live streams that we've done, dating back now, I think maybe about 2 months or so. And of course, for those that are looking for that next level of knowledge and information, so that's why we created Solar Surge University as well, was just to be able to provide a very comprehensive full solar sales training program. I mean, that's Joe and I's 20 plus years of experience now, consolidated into video modules. I think last I counted, Joe, it's roughly 60 video modules plus live sales calls and stuff included. So for those that are interested in that and really want to kind of go to that next level, that would be the next, paid service where you can actually dive into that in greater depth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's jump back to our process diagram here. So we're looking at the solar installation process. Now, again, this top path here, this is the first path that you have to do with the local AHJ. And again, AHJ stands for Authority Having Jurisdiction. This is your local town, city, or county government where you go to apply for permits. Now, this middle path here is your utility interconnection application. Again, folks, everything kicks off after the site survey. So the site survey has to be completed successfully to validate that what was sold, what was designed, is actually viable to be installed. But once you clear that, then you can do all 3 of these paths in parallel. So the middle path here is your interconnection application with the utility company. And very similar to the local city or county, the power company is generally going to want to know all the specifications on all the equipment you're proposing to install and how you're proposing to install it. In my experience, the utility is typically more concerned about the electrical side of the construction, right? The voltages, the current limits, what type of circuit breakers are you using, what type of disconnecting means. But basically, their focus is going to be more on the electrical side of the design, whereas your local AHJ is going to be concerned with both structural. We mentioned earlier, some places you have to build to a higher wind rating because there's hurricanes or what have you. So they're going to be analyzing both structural and electrical. In my experience, the utilities pretty much stick to the electrical, but they're certainly going to want to know every major system component, make, model. They want to make sure that the components themselves are properly listed to interact with the electric grid. In other words, you're not just buying some generic components, online and putting it together, but you're actually using listed components that have passed third-party underwriting and testing. And so that is all what will be included in the interconnection application. You probably will include the solar panel layout as well. But again, mainly they just want to make sure that what you're installing and how you're installing it is code compliant, that their grid can handle it. It's not going to pose any kind of danger or risk to the electric grid or any of the other customers on the electric grid. Dan, any thoughts on the interconnection process?
Yeah, no, I mean, pretty, simple and straightforward in most cases. There can be some utilities that might have limitations on system sizing, whether it's the DC or the AC rating of systems. So that's where just being knowledgeable, within your own market would be, pretty imperative in the sales process. The last thing you want to do is sell a solar system. For example, I know that Dominion Energy in Virginia has a max system size of 25 kilowatts AC. So the last thing you want to do is sell a solar system that's maybe a 30 kilowatt system, which is a rather large solar system, just to find out that they're going to kick it back. And then you've got to go to the homeowner and get a change order. And it just looks like you didn't know what you were talking about. So you might want to make sure that you just are familiar with what some of those utility requirements are, if there are max system size, or could be also max production relationship to your usage, right? A lot of utilities might limit you and say, we don't want a solar system that will produce greater than 100% of your previous 12 months energy usage. And if it's at 105%, the utility might have the right to say, we don't accept this, we're denying it. So you just need to be aware of what some of those things are, so that, number one, you can be a professional salesperson in solar and explaining how this would work. But number two, you just avoid those issues that could happen with the utilities. But by and large, I think a little sales closing training that I've done here before and how I've used this is, a lot of times if I'm sensing that a homeowner is a little hesitant to get started on moving forward, sometimes what I can do is help ease that by explaining, look, just because you sign and we move forward here doesn't automatically mean that solar is going to be on your roof tomorrow. There is a process for approvals, and sometimes it'll be sold as the 3 approval, close or something like that, where it's like, look, number one, or you could say 4, right? The first approval is you and I, let's agree to get started. Second is we need engineering, the authorities, to your location, authorities having jurisdiction need to approve this. The utility needs to approve it. The HOA might need to approve it. If you want to throw a fifth one in there, it could be the financing company has to approve it. So sometimes that can help a homeowner understand, like, look, just because you say yay, let's go forward, doesn't automatically right away mean that we can get the project installed. Now, in most cases, you're going to be able to get it installed, right? In most cases, that's just a way to kind of like bring down the pressure of making the decision, to allow us to get started and move forward, and then allow the processes to play out from there. But there are approvals that are required from all these different entities. And so sometimes I'll explain that. But yeah, on the utility side, Joe, I just would mainly recommend that people understand what their utility policies are, so that you look like a professional versus having to come back later and say, oh, yeah, I sold you a system that's too big, or we can't do this, because then it plants all these seeds of doubt of like, does Dan really know what he's talking about?
Right. And a lot of times, guys, I mean, this can be accomplished with a quick Google search. Just put in the name of the utility, solar program, And typically you'll find the right page there, and the utility will tell you kind of what the guidelines are that you have to work within for a successful interconnection. You may also hear it called net metering application, but the industry is kind of going away from true net metering. So it's basically it's an interconnection. You're going to connect your solar system to their electric grid, and what are the rules for how they allow you to do that?
Yeah, it might also be
It,
called a rider in some places. You might hear people say rider, like it's a net metering rider or solar energy rider, something like that. But those would be things that you can Google search, or even, I don't know, maybe Chat GPT or something might help you find what you're looking for just by asking the questions. So
yeah, and Dan, you touched on something earlier too, is that, typically the utility will limit how large of a system you can install, because, I mean, for a number of reasons. One is I don't think they don't want to take a whole lot of overproduction, especially if they're on a true one-for-one net metering, because it's unprofitable for the utility. But the other issue is, as many of you watching this know, that there's a number of bad actors in the solar industry here. And oftentimes a solar salesperson's compensation is based on how many solar panels they can sell or how large of a system they can sell. And so if they can get a customer to buy 20 solar panels, or maybe they only need 12 solar panels, typically the salesperson has a financial incentive to go larger. And so the utility application also acts as kind of a check and balance there to say, hey, is what's being proposed here, does this actually match what the homeowner's needs are? Or is there potential here of fraud or the customers being taken advantage of? Now, I should also say, oftentimes there's a legitimate explanation. In fact, nowadays, a lot of people are installing solar and they'll tell us at the time of sale, again, going back to doing proper needs analysis, they'll tell us at the time of sale or during the discovery, hey, I know my electric usage was a certain amount last year, but I just bought an electric vehicle, or I'm planning on buying an electric vehicle in the next couple of months. I'm planning on adding a swimming pool or a pool heater. And so oftentimes, if you can justify why you need to install a larger power system than what the previous home usage would justify, if you can convey that to the power company, then typically they'll let you through that on the interconnection application.
yeah,
Dan,
that's a big
any
part.
last thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I look, a lot of times I know a lot of the clients that we work with and that I work with on a daily basis are either, hey, I don't own an EV now, but I'm planning on getting one in the next year, 2 years, or I've got a growing family. My energy needs are going to change, right? For a lot of people, I mean, like you said before, Joe, investing in solar is a construction project. It's a big project. You want to, if you can do it, you want to make sure you do it the right way from the beginning. Now, I'd also say that for everyone else's knowledge, just because you start at one point doesn't mean typically you can't expand your system as well, assuming there's, viable space for that. But the reality of it is a lot of people would like to do it one time. Maybe the pricing is better now than it will be later, interest rates, whatever it is. So sometimes it's, hey, let me help you anticipate what your increased usage is going to be with your electric vehicle. And so that's a common one that I see, which anyone that might be wondering that question, generally rule of thumb from what I have seen, average as a Tesla EV owner myself, average electric vehicle usage based on mileage and exact EV, typically 2,000 to 3,500 kilowatt hours additional per year is what I have typically seen out of my own usage. And I'm a pretty high mileage driver. I typically do, even in today's virtual world, family and going to visit and stuff, I typically do 20 to 25,000 miles a year, with pretty much all of my charging, 95% of my charging, happening at my house. So I would say someone like me is probably on the 3,000 kilowatt hours, per year of additional usage because of the EV. And you might have to figure out what does that translate to in terms of how many panels. But if you have an average of, 500 kilowatt hours per panel, okay, I know I need X amount of panels, 6 panels, right, to make up that performance. So just something to kind of know for those that might be wondering. Other common upgrades though that I see, sometimes people are putting in a hot tub. Maybe they plan to put in a pool, and they're going to be using some sort of electric heating for that. Maybe they're planning to convert their gas appliances over to electric. That's going to increase usage. So you kind of need to anticipate for some of those things. So those are questions I might ask in my discovery process earlier on about appliances and how they use things. And, do you have an EV? Are you anticipating an EV? Just so I can be the most thorough in my discovery process to then build the right solution for them.
Excellent. Excellent. By the way, shout out there to Frank down in Texas and Jones One. Appreciate you guys logging on here to the live stream. All right, we're down to the last 15 minutes or so I want to make sure that we're able to get through this. So we talked about engineering and permitting process. That's with your local AHJ to get permits. We talked about the utility interconnection process and how they have to give approval before you can install. Now, the third one is if you have a homeowners association or a property owners association. And so not every home is going to fall within this kind of a situation, but if you do, typically there's a filing that sometimes it's called a major modification request form or an architectural review form. But basically it's a summary of the changes to the property and you have to get the HOA approval for that. Now, most installers will have an administrative person on staff that helps facilitate this process. So typically you don't want to let the homeowner just kind of fend for themselves on that. We want to be supporting them with our administrative team that does a number of these, day in and day out. So we kind of know how to navigate the process. Or in some cases, if the homeowner has already submitted the HOA application themselves, that's a good indication to you that this homeowner's pretty serious about going solar. So let's just make sure that we can get them the right solution so we can get this process started. Now, once all of the third-party approvals are secured, again, local permit, utility approval, and optionally homeowners association approval, then that's when we can actually schedule an installation date and actually deliver the materials to the job site. Now, some installers will drop ship the material directly from a distributor to the homeowner's property. Some of the installers like to take advantage of the cost savings of not actually having to handle the equipment in their own vehicles and their own warehouses. So they just have it drop shipped to the home. And that could happen maybe 2 or 3 days before the actual scheduled installation date. Or the installer may just send the equipment out with the installation crew. So you might see them all show up in a van or in a box truck where they have everything with them, materials and labor, and then they go about doing the work. Now, when you're talking about installing solar, you've got a few different parts of the job, right? There's typically solar panels on the roof. And then depending on whether you're doing a micro inverter based system where the inverters are actually on the roof as well underneath each solar panel, or it could be a central inverter based system like Solar Edge, where you're typically going to have an electrical crew on the ground, usually just 1 or 2 guys on the ground, hooking up the inverter while you've got the roof crew setting the panels on the roof and running conductors down. And then optionally, if you're doing a battery backup with your solar system, there'll be the additional installation of the batteries and some sort of a transfer switch. I know each of the manufacturers have a different name for it, but it's basically a transfer switch, something that allows you to isolate your home from the electric grid, but still provide secure power from solar and batteries inside the house without risk of putting any live voltage back onto the grid when the grid is unstable. And so a lot of times all 3 of those activities can happen in parallel, depending on how the team is configured that goes out to your house. But I think what you're going to find, folks, is that the actual physical installation itself takes the least time of anything else on this chart here. The physical installation, even if you're doing solar with batteries, is 2 or 3 days tops. I mean, in some extenuating circumstances, you might be there for a week, but typical solar installation is 1 day solar only, or 2 to 3 days if you're doing solar with battery backup. Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just about to say that, and Edward Gonzalez here had commented, and good to see you here, Edward. He's one of our dealer partners as well. But how much longer is the process with adding battery? So, like Joe just mentioned, when you add the battery from an install perspective, doesn't take tremendously longer. I mean, I would say I typically, word of advice, and for everybody as well, is I always tell people longer, right? We've all heard that expression in the past of, you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. You'd rather, underpromise and overdeliver, right? And so what I will typically tell somebody is, hey, average system, install with a battery is 3 to 5 days, knowing hopefully that in best case scenarios, right, they're done in 1-2 days. Typical, scenarios 1 to 3 days. In a worst case scenario, it falls right into the window that I told them, 3 to 5 days. Right. For solar only, I'll typically tell them, oh yeah, it might take, 1-2 days, 1 to 3 days. But depending on how simple the array is and the design, it more than likely is only going to be a 1-day install. Now, it does take longer, typically, by what I've seen, maybe a week to 2 weeks in the engineering phase when you have a battery involved, just because there's a little bit more detailed engineering that has to take place. It also depends on how the battery is being used. right? If it's used as a critical load backup, then there's doing some load analysis and calculations and things of that sort. If it's doing a whole home, it's a little bit easier for them to just automatically right away say, hey, the entire load center for this house is being backed up on the battery. But I would say generally with a battery, my experience has been another 1 to 2 weeks during the engineering processes. Normally that's with the install, right? The installer is taking a little bit longer to generate their plans for the projects with batteries. Once it's submitted over to the AHJ, I think the review process is typically about the same, assuming they don't come back and ask for requests and modifications and changes. But generally, you're probably adding week and a half of combined additional time in the engineering side and in the install side, and that's both of those added together, obviously. So that's typically what I see with battery as far as that goes.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I have seen is, and I would probably take a little bit more conservative estimate and say probably about 30 days more for a solar with battery project to get through everything than with just a solar only project. It depends on what area you're in, because as Dan mentioned, the engineering, the internal engineering team at the installer may take longer to generate the plans, but depending on what jurisdiction you're operating in, the plan reviewers may also take longer to review the plans and issue your permits. And a lot of times that has to do with the fact that a more junior level plan reviewer may not understand what he or she is reading when they see a schematic that has solar and batteries and maybe a generator mixed in there too. And so they may have to escalate it to a more senior plan reviewer, which could mean that the city or the county is just sitting on your application longer before issuing the permits. So I like to set expectations of about 30 days more than a solar only project to get through the whole piece. Because even once we get the equipment installed, there's still two other pieces that we have to accomplish before we have a fully functioning solar system. And so as we are winding down, I want to make sure that we touch on those last two milestones in the process. Right. Once all the equipment is installed, the AHJ will come out to do an inspection. Right. So typically the same office or similar office to where you applied for your permits, they're going to have an inspector that's going to come out to check that what has actually been installed matches the plans, matches the permit that was issued, and that there weren't any changes that were introduced. Sometimes if there are changes introduced, and I've seen this before, Dan, we sell a certain brand of solar panel. That solar panel is not available on the market anywhere. We have to substitute with a similar solar panel, but it doesn't match. It's a different make and model, even though performance-wise, it may look like the original make and model that was sold, but we may have to go back then and file for new permits after the install of what equipment we actually could buy and actually could deliver to make sure that that matches what the county or what the city has on file. So that does happen from time to time. But basically, the AHJ has to give their final inspection. That then closes out the permits. And then once the inspection's passed, then that gives notification to the power company to actually give you the final PTO. So PTO is kind of like that's the win that we're looking for, final permission to operate. But the utility won't give that until all the inspections and the permits are closed out ahead of that. And I also say, Dan, this is probably one of the places where a lot of homeowners I see get frustrated, because although we as the solar company can control a lot of the schedule of what we do, what we cannot control is the schedule of how fast the county will inspect. Although generally they're good. I would say generally the AHJs will inspect within 1 week of us completing the physical work. But there's then that point between when the inspections pass and when the final PTO is issued. And I've talked to some homeowners that have, they've been on the online forums and they've heard of horror stories of customers have to wait, a month, maybe 2 months before actually getting that final PTO. I think from a customer experience and just setting proper expectations, it may be good to draw a distinction between what part of this process, this schedule, we control versus what is out of our control, so that if there is a delayed inspection or a delayed PTO, it's not coming back on the contractor. Dan,
Yeah.
your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that part unfortunately is very I guess you could say imperative to set proper expectation, but also have that there so that you can remind your client if or when that phase happens of, hey, look, Joe, I told you about this. I have seen, and look, it's frustrating because that phase between the inspection passing, the contractor submitting the past inspection notice or report to the utility company, and when the utility company officially authorizes PTO, I've seen that before with some utilities where it happens within a matter of days. I've seen others that it's taken months, at times. And the hard part about that is that a lot of that, like you said, it's no longer within the control of the contractor, right? The contractor can try to lean on the utility and push the utility, but the nature of why we are passionate about wanting to help homeowners go solar as well is because utilities naturally are monopolistic in nature, right? There typically only is one option. So I always kind of have to remind our clients if and when that time happens, because oftentimes it'll be, well, look, I wouldn't be in this situation if I didn't go solar. And I can't disagree. I 100% agree. You would not be in the situation where you're waiting on PTO if you didn't go solar. However, Mr. or Mrs. Client, right? Remember that if you didn't go solar as well, you'd have to deal with that same utility for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And they're going to keep, generating tons and tons and tons of money and revenue from you as your cost of electricity keeps rising. So unfortunately, yes, we're paying the price right now if it's a 30-day PTO process or 60-day PTO process. But the good thing is that that's 2 months, and then you got the rest of your life to enjoy the benefit of the solar system and the energy independence that you're going to have. So I think if you can properly preempt that issue and that objection or that concern, it'll also help you come back to addressing that later on if that happens. Now, I know a lot of financing companies now, especially this could be one of the values for financing or for leasing and stuff as well, is that payments don't go into effect until PTO is issued. Because I think that's been the area where some people have had bad experiences, right? They've paid their contractor. They feel like the contractor dropped the ball, stopped doing the work, and now they're just kind of leaving them high and dry as they have all this equipment sitting on their roof. They paid tens of thousands of dollars for, and they can't use it. Well, that is one of the advantages I have seen more recently with the financing, where the financing companies won't kick in the monthly payments. And sometimes it also means they're not paying the contractor the remaining funds for the project or all of the funds for the project until PTO is issued. So it's that becomes a little unfortunate, I must say, for the contractor, because on one side, look, they've taken on all the expense of buying the materials, of cash flowing the entire operation, of the engineering, of the permitting fees, of the labor costs, or they got to pay their employees, but yet they can't collect payment from the banks until the utility company issues the PTO. That really puts the contractor in a really tough spot as well. So I see both sides of the argument. I 100% understand where people are coming from, where they're like, well, hey, look, I wouldn't be in this position. You're right. But again, being in this position still is going to be better than what a lifetime of sticking with the utility is going to be. But I think if you can just prepare people for that PTO process, we have an email automation that goes out to our clients that once they officially have PTO, the language essentially says something to the extent of, "Woo, like glad that's over," right? Because it's like it's a process, and sometimes it's really frustrating, sometimes it's really annoying, and they're calling the utility company. The utility company is telling them, "Oh, we don't have any record of this," but it's just because the utility company has an antiquated way of processing their PTOs that one department's not communicating with the other. So I've seen all sorts of messes when it comes to that process. But transparency, honesty, and setting proper expectation, again, I think is really going to save you when you get to that phase of the project. If you can leverage back and say, hey, look, I told you about this earlier. I wasn't trying to spook you, but I was trying to prepare you for the fact that this is something we can't really control. So I don't know, Joe. I don't know if you've had that same type of experience, but I've definitely seen some issues before.
Well, I was just going to say on this, and I know we're getting short on time here, so I'll keep it short and sweet. But you want to be strategic, folks, about where you're engaging in sales activity. You want to be engaging in sales activity in markets where you're going to get favorable treatment from the utility. That means favorable treatment in terms of hopefully a good net metering program, so the homeowner can get a good payback on the solar investment, but also good treatment in the fact that the utility is actually processing and turning around the interconnection applications in a timely manner. So again, if you're thinking about making the switch to virtual sales, One of the nice things about the Solar Surge dealer network is we can help you target your sales and marketing activities in the markets where we know we can be the most competitive, where we can get the fastest installs and the fastest commission payments. Because Dan, that's the other side of it. It's not just bad for the contractor if they have to wait an extra 2 or 3 months to get paid. That means that the sales organization is also waiting an extra 2 to 3 months to receive their commissions. And of course, we need timely payment of commissions to happen predictably if we're going to be able to grow and scale any kind of a sales business. Well, folks, we've already hit our 1 hour limit here, guys. Again, thank you for all the real-time feedback and the questions coming in. That's why we do these on the live stream, is so that you can ask your questions, post your comments, and have us answer those in real time. And so again, we are here every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. Live stream goes out to YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. Again, for those of you who have not got it already, you can download the Solar Surge virtual sales process on the free download link below. And of course, watch the previous live trainings. If you're in the process of maybe thinking about entering the solar sales profession, or how you can level up and really set yourself apart from the competition, that's why we deliver these trainings. And of course, Solar Surge University is available for those who really, really want to take a deep dive and learn just like you would if you were working with Dan and I directly here, as we used to. Dan, anything else for the audience here before we sign out on today's broadcast?
No, I mean, again, I think again, everything in sales, guys, is setting proper expectations. And I think if you set a proper expectation, you deliver a value to your client. You're providing a service, a product, whatever it is. While setting those proper expectations, I think you're going to set yourself up for success. I think largely as well in solar, those that succeed the most have built really good referral business out of it. So setting a proper expectation allows you to really then capture referral opportunities, word of mouth, positive, interactions and experiences. So I think understanding the installation process, go back through this video time and time again if you need to just understand what that looks like. And then, incorporate that into your presentation. I think that's really going to help you grow your business and you grow your own personal income and opportunities, in the industry. So
great. Well, folks, that does it for today's broadcast. We thank you again for spending some time here with Solar Surge, and we will see you on the next